Analysts believe that the President may announce the reintroduction of tighter regulations on the sale of things like alcohol and perhaps limiting interprovincial travel and other measures as well. Well, to take this discussion a little bit further, we're now joined on Skype by Professor Narnia Bohler Muller, who's the Divisional Executive of Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Research Program at the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
It's a tremendous pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So I think one of the things that's become quite clear that is the best models to try and predict what happens next are not working because this animal seems to have its own way. And a quick thing for me here is I'm comparing us to the United Kingdom. Our populations are not terribly different. The United Kingdom, 288,000 cases. We've had 264,000. But the UK had 44,000 deaths, whilst we've only had 3,900. I say only, and that's only because I'm comparing the two. So when you get such variances, it becomes difficult, I guess, to model going forward.
Yes, I think it does. We're in the top 10 now. I think you've just mentioned the UK just ahead of us in the 9th spot in terms of total number of cases. But the rate of death is much lower. I think we're just under 2%. And in terms of global rankings, we're at number 47 in the world. But at the same time, the growth of cases is really tremendous at the moment. We're number 4. Obviously, US, we can see what's happening there. And then Brazil and India are just ahead of us in terms of number of deaths per day. So it is very difficult to model or predict. It seems to be different from country to country. I think the coldness of this winter, as was mentioned earlier, will also lead to more cases at this stage, but we've been told we're only in the eye of storm. We're still going to be seeing the peak going up into September. So I'm not sure how one can look at this in terms of the comparison that you've made between the UK and South Africa. Perhaps the early lockdown, stage 5, where we were getting ready, perhaps that was the difference. Because if you recall, the UK didn't really go into lockdown until a little later.
All right, so the President and his Command Council sitting and having to make decisions. What does one do at this time? He's got to balance the books in terms of the economy, but at the same time, got to save lives. So what might be the prudent thing to do at this stage? Is it to introduce stricter measures?
Well, he has to listen to his experts, and he has a number of them surrounding him. And thus far, I think he has been listening to the experts. And one wonders if it wouldn't be better if we could just maybe bring some of the restrictions back because of the fact that the movement of people seems to be a big problem. So interprovincial travel, as well as public transport. We know that the taxis are not wanting to comply with the 70% capacity, and they're putting 100, maybe even more than 100% capacity into taxis. That needs to be cracked down on, I think, to some extent. And then some tighter regulations on the sale of alcohol. I'm not sure if there will be a total ban because of the economy, but there does seem to be a problem around alcohol leading to lack of social distancing and also filling ICU beds. And we don't want beds to be filled in hospitals because we just don't have beds for COVID patients. So if we increase the number of beds being used by people for reasons of various reasons dealing with alcohol abuse, then that's very problematic. We can't go back to the heavy lockdown, the full lockdown. It's impossible. But I'm sure that, for example, in Gauteng, the MEC is pleading for some of the regulations to be tightened again for good reason as well. Soweto is the epicenter. It's a hotspot, and it's frightening at the moment.
So the last time the president spoke to us, he did say something. He said, it's in your hands. And a lot of people didn't quite interpret it, perhaps, how he said it. But I guess in a sense what he was saying is that he was calling to us now to help with this pandemic and start behaving in a way that protects each other. I was speaking to somebody in Austria, and he says that one of the reasons that they did well is that people there generally comply with requests by government. I suppose now is the time for us as South Africans to really start thinking about some of the things that we're being told and come to the party.
Yes, it would be a pity if we had to always use regulations or a top-down approach or state-centric approach to this. It would be far better if people were responsible in terms of social distancing, in terms of wearing masks and washing their hands, caring not only about themselves, about others as well. But there does seem to be high levels of non-compliance in certain areas in the country. And that has to stop. People have to start looking after themselves and one another. And I think that's the only message that the president can give us. And it's the most important message. It's literally in our hands. And I don't think that's washing his hands of any form of responsibility. But people can't be playing political games at the moment. This is far too serious, and we need to be united and not divided on these issues.
Yeah, and I see people all the time being a bit relaxed with the masks and having friends visit all the time. And shocking videos online, people having parties and dancing. There just doesn't seem to be a full understanding of what we're dealing with. What do you think it will take, though, to change that mindset?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I think consistent messaging, not only from government, but from the private sector, the NGO sector, awareness raising, to make people aware of the fact that they have a responsibility towards others. I mean, my next door neighbors are constantly having large lunches and parties, and I don't want to report them to the police or anything, but to see such behavior is frightening because it just shows that this isn't being taken seriously. And it's as if people think that because it's lockdown 3, it's okay. The virus understands that it's lockdown 3. No, it doesn't. And I think maybe we opened up too quickly. There was so much pressure put on government to open up. And we may have well just sort of opened the sluice gates and created the impression that everything is fine, but everything is not fine. And it's good that the president is going to be addressing the nation. There's still a high level of trust in President Ramaphosa himself. And he needs to keep bringing this message home, constantly bringing this message home that the virus is with us. We need to try and do everything we can to make sure that there are beds in hospitals, that there is oxygen, that there are ways of treating people and taking this seriously. We can't just think that life goes on. It's not. For a long time, this is going to change our lives.
All right. So what would you most like to hear from the president this evening?
I'd like to hear him acknowledge the fact that this is a sacrifice that the nation is making, but that we require a sense of social solidarity, that we need to think about caring for one another more. We need to think about how to live in the spirit of Ubuntu. And yes, to just look after ourselves and one another. I think that's the most important message. There's all sorts of other practical things that he's going to be talking about in terms of regulations. But I do secretly also hope that some of the regulations are tightened.
All right. Professor Narnia Bohler Muller, thank you so much indeed for joining us for this chat ahead of the President's announcement a little bit later this evening. Now, the Limpopo